to bring your practice into every single aspect of your life.
When we come to our practices with a sense of sincerity, coming into your practice with a sense of self-empowerment, I think is also very important.
It's not about how many books you have out or how many followers you have. You know, we all have the same value. We're all part of the same stuff.
You're not just healing that present situation, you're working through it in your past and your future. Your medicine could be someone else's poison, and their poison can be your medicine. Alrighty, everyone, welcome back to the Infernal Alchemy podcast with your host, Christian, aka the Atlantean Alchemist, and
Viv, aka Lunar Faery Witch.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about darkfluff, the Edgelords, and all the misconceptions about working with demons. So first, do you want to start on the topic of darkfluff and edgelords and what the hell is a darkfluff?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of people wonder what darkfluff actually means when, we talk about it. And it's basically, how do I say this? It's very, I guess the right word to use would be performative. It's very over the top. It's very no substance, but that kind of scary imagery and trying to be all like creepy and scary and being like, yeah, I'm totally a Satanist, even though I don't know anything about Satanism, but I just pretend to be a Satanism. It's like using it almost for an aesthetic and then also acting in a way that is very edgelordy, very embarrassing to the rest of us, to be completely honest. I think it's really important that we talk about it because it's something that I feel gives us a bad name when people see like quote like left-hand path people acting like utter fools. But yeah, what's your definition of darkfluff? Because I can't really find the words to describe.
I would say darkfluff or edgelords are the people you see in the left-hand path community that are very focused on, like you mentioned, the aesthetic, but like to the extent where it's like they scare away the idea of other people coming in if they aren't as embracive of these very dark archetypes. Like they're very like horror movie aesthetic, and there's nothing wrong with loving horror movies. It's just when you approach the left-hand path with that perspective or that imagery, you scare away a lot of people that have to break through those misconceptions. And it keeps people from wanting to explore what feels right for them because they're stuck in this, like, oh my God, am I gonna like sell my soul for like a penny and not know it? Like like if I just look at this person, am I just giving my soul or my voice away like Ursula to this person just looking at their work? And some people make you feel like that. And we were just talking about TikToker. Did you want to talk about that as well?
Oh yeah. So there is a TikToker. I'm not gonna name drop anyone just because, but talking about summoning like succubuses, talking, and then if someone like says that, like asks how to banish them, they say like that's your problem. Very like cult-like behavior as well. I've seen another TikToker threaten to hex someone's child or to curse someone's child with disease and curse just like everyone she comes across. She has this very dark aesthetic, but it's very clear she knows nothing about witchcraft. She spreads a lot of misinformation. I have her blocked, so I doubt she'll ever listen to this, but if you are, hi. And it's all very obvious. It's very obvious, even in short form video, seeing someone who is just doing this for the aesthetic and like for performative reasons versus someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And, I get it. It gets you a lot of followers. You gain tens of thousands of followers just to watch you be ridiculous and this theatrical stuff and this drama and everything. But honestly, I think this whole darkfluff stuff, it's a lot of the time it's the exact same as like the 5G microchip conspiracy theorists, but they're wearing black, and they're using a lot of skulls and all this stuff. And I say this as someone who almost exclusively wears black. So, I feel like it's almost like an exploiting of legitimate practices.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's like it keeps people from wanting to explore these paths in the sense of like, when you're doing the work and you're beginning to kind of come out of the biases that you have from like organized religion, you end up in this sort of mentality, am I gonna turn out like this person? If like, because I noticed it, or at least in my own practice, where in the beginning, I was just like, oh my God, am I going to become like these people? Am I, and the truth is really, it's about following your own path. It's really about self-embodiment, reclaiming your own truth and embodying that. You're not going to become like anyone but yourself, unraveled from all those biases. And I think that's important. Like, for example, my own aesthetic, I barely wear black. I wear a lot of pinks. If you've seen my eyeshadows on YouTube, or even my nails, I have them done in a lot of pinks. I like a lot of color, and that's okay. And I think by kind of looking past this performative and theatrical aesthetic that's presented to people, we can get closer to the actual work with those spirits and get very closer to what they're all about, because it does feed into our bias of this whole idea of like good versus evil.
Actually, it's interesting that you bring that up, because when I asked on Twitter, about like misconceptions surrounding these practices, someone did say, having to look a certain way, and this, I feel like this dark fluff stuff really leads into like what you said about your aesthetic. Like, yes, you're very like pastel, very, like pink and stuff like that in terms of your aesthetic. And I feel like people don't expect that, and it's funny because like what you wear really has nothing to do with the spirits you work with, and the whole idea that you have to be this like look a certain way kind of plays into like the whole bias in media surrounding like how we've spoken about in the past about the bad guy, quote unquote bad guys, always wearing black. It really plays into the whole demons are bad thing, which they're not, and that all demons have this like scary looking about them, the scary aesthetic or whatever, which could not be further from the truth. There's demons who will appear to you wearing all gold. There's demons wearing white. Like, there's not one way demons are. There's not one way demons look, because they're not a monolith, And I really do think that this whole dark fluff thing, it just really does a disservice to all these practices. It's just really not very helpful, in the same way that, the all love and light, fluffy, kind of only, those types of people really do a disservice to Wicca, for example. It's just really a disservice, to be honest. That's really all.
Yeah, totally. Um, and one thing I did want to bring up actually before we start talking about some of the misconceptions, I wanted to bring up the origins of demons. We don't talk a lot about that. So one thing you have to understand is that demons, even though we refer to them as that, the original word for demon is daemon, which means spirit in Greek. So really, these are just spirits that we're referring to, trying to get out of this umbrella term that we box them in, and realizing that a lot of these spirits were ancient gods and goddesses that were demonized by monotheistic religions, particularly the Abrahamic religions, where everyone wanted to feel like their god was more important than someone else's god. That was a theme, and they created entirely different names for them, like Baal became Baal, or rather Baal became Baal, and like Astaroth was Astarte, or Inanna or Asherah. All those names were demonized and changed and twisted. While I do believe that there are some infernal spirits born purely from the darkness and affinity of those realms, and not necessarily were gods or goddesses, there is this intermingling that's going on. So it's not all that it seems. So we do have to kind of look past the lore with a grain of salt and recognize that the lore that we do have on them was written by exorcists and ceremonial magicians of the time that binded these spirits from a monotheistic religional perspective of like these spirits are forced and are need to be subjugated. This is the only way to interact with them because they're evil and vile, because they're pushing the agenda that they are not something that is of God as per the Abrahamic God. So that's a perspective you do have to take with a grain of salt when you're looking and doing your research. And we have quite a few more misconceptions that we want to go through. I'll leave the rest to Viv here.
Yeah, so absolutely. We need to keep in mind who wrote the lore, who wrote the myths, and really read things in context with mythology, with lore, especially when it comes to demons, because it really makes no sense to completely overlook the biases of the people writing said lore. Especially if you are talking about, especially if you're against mythic literalism in all forms except for demons, it really makes no sense. If you're against mythic literalism, and if you're for looking into the context of who wrote those myths and lore, then you should really do that for every class of spirit and not just one class of spirits. Yeah. It's always very interesting to me when people complain about Abrahamic religions, but then think all demons are evil, or all demons are this, all demons are that, and just only view them from that same lens. Because then it's very clear to me that they haven't actually really done the work to, I hope this doesn't hurt anyone's feelings, but they haven't done the work to actually unlearn those things. And that's really important. If you are going to talk about these spirits, you need to understand that they were written from a certain perspective. Like, you cannot overlook that. Like, it's just the way it is. And same with some pagan deities and paganism as well. It's not just demons. So, yes.
Yeah, and like going into that a little further, I want to talk about how darkness and light don't necessarily equal good and evil. While this is talked about a lot in my own work, being aware that we have to get out of this mentality that everything that is equated with darkness is evil and everything equated with light is good. I think every being has their own bit of each within them. And I think it's important to explore your own affinity, whether that's with light, with darkness, or somewhere in between. You have to explore that and find that out for yourself. And the problem is that our media feeds us the imageries of this constant battle between good and evil, such as with the protagonists and antagonists that we see in like a lot of shows. And it's always the antagonist who carries this sort of dark aesthetic, and the protagonist that carries this like light of the hero. And that itself feeds the misconceptions and the biases, because we have to start viewing the villains more as neutral. We have to start viewing what are their origins, what is truly their mentality, what if they were truly the protagonist and the hero was the antagonist. And we have to kind of start to question things for ourselves in an attempt to identify where we stand. Not everyone's truth is going to match up with someone else's, and that's perfectly valid. It's important to explore these things so that you know what works for you. Not everything, like I mentioned in the first episode, is going to work for you as it would work for someone else, and vice versa. And some spirits, even in the left-hand path, embody the non-dualistic perspective of embodying both light and darkness. For example, Lucifer is a really big archetype on this, where he is like the perfect symbolism of light and darkness unified, where all his light is internalized and he can express his darkness outwards and vice versa through his many masks and the way that he appears to people. And I actually want to take from this topic and go further into talking about the differences of and the issues that come up with the misconceptions of Satanism, theistic Satanism, and Luciferianism. I'll let Viv start that topic.
Yes, absolutely. And before I do that, I just wanted to mention, when I first got into goth and really figured out my style and stuff, I got that so much where people assumed I was like a bad person just because I wore a certain color, and it really just goes to show how like societal programming, how our society has such an unhealthy relationship to like darkness. And you know, we could do a whole other episode on this, but our society's attitude towards death and how unhealthy that attitude is, and how no one wants to talk about it, no one wants to think about it, especially in Western society. And we can talk about that another time, but yes, let's go into theistic versus atheistic Satanism and versus Luciferianism. So there's two assumptions I see with this. A, that only atheistic Satanism exists, and that Satanists are all atheistic, which is not the case. And two, that Luciferianism and Satanism is the same thing. So the first thing I want to touch upon is atheistic Satanism is a thing. It does exist. And I see this misconception from both outsiders to Satanism, but also especially from atheistic Satanists as well. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them do think that they're the only valid ones, and I'm here to say that that's not true. You can't just like erase an entire subsect of a religion, right? Theistic Satanism is definitely valid. It is a thing. There's books about it. There's practitioners of it. There's demonolators who are also theistic Satanists, where Satan is like their patron, or they work very closely with Satan in a theistic kind of manner. So both of those are valid. And then the other thing I want to touch upon is like Satanism versus Luciferianism, where people assume they're the same thing. And I think that kind of ties into the idea that Satan and Lucifer are the same. There are different views on this, so I don't think there's one correct view. However, my view on this is that they're not the same being, but if you look at the word Satan as a title, if you look at it as the word adversary, then it could be applied as a title to Lucifer, but they're not the same entity, if that makes sense. So therefore, Satanism and Luciferianism aren't quite the same thing, because Luciferianism focuses on Lucifer as an entity, whereas Satanism focuses on either the archetype of Satan in the atheistic manner, or the actual being of Satan as an entity.
Yeah, totally. And I wanted to address something that Viv mentioned, that with the concept of Lucifer and Satan being the same entity. I very much agree with it, like in the sense of like viewing Satan as like more of a title to Lucifer. Like I know some practitioners that call on Satanus Luciferi or Lucifer Principus, and these kind of titles of Lucifer, that he embodies more of the adversary. I want to say there's definitely this divine spark of Satan in the workings of Lucifer that you will have to come across with some of the masks of him. I wouldn't say that it's his full embodiment. It may be a different experience for someone else, not to invalidate anyone else's experiences. But the energies are very different, where Satan to me feels more of an energy of revolution and revolt and like social justice. And Lucifer to me feels like the illumination, the wisdom, the reclamation of self. And then Satan feels like it's not just the reclamation of self, it's the reclamation of mankind. And they go hand in hand. And I'm exploring that more in my own practice. Me and Viv were just talking about my experiences with Satan before we got on. And so that was something I really wanted to address. And it's come to my awareness on how powerful these spirits affect people and their perceptions, their moralities and ethics. Even just the archetype of these energies for the atheistic Satanists. I notice now why they're so focused on social justice and social revolution and things like that. Like that energy of the adversary, they embody it, even just working with the archetype. So I find that really fascinating, really amazing. So I just really wanted to address that. And I did want to go into talking about the matter of relationships with demons versus whether you could build a relationship with them or whether it's more transactional. So with demons in general, you have to understand that every demon is different. Some may require more offerings than others. One that really comes to mind is Belial, who tends to be more about offerings. but that I feel like is more in showing of good favor with him. I think I think I mentioned in the previous episode, he kind of reminds me of a mafia boss in the way that he expresses himself. He's very much like paying homage to your patron, is how I would say, is how it would go with giving offerings to him, like very much like you're one of his people. If you're one of his people, he'll take good care of you. And whoever's not with him is sleeping with the fishes. That tends to be his motif, I've noticed. So it really depends on the spirit when it comes to relationships and transactions. But it's important to know that there's certain spirits, particularly I noticed with Dantelion. And that's how I was able to get into working on the left-hand path because of my work with Dantelion. Dantelion's very focused on the quality of relationships. He doesn't really care so much about this idea of transactionality with offerings. He cares more about the importance, the quality of the bonds, and what is being able to be expressed and communicated. He cares more about the heart-to-heart connection and the morals and ethics of a person that works with him and exploring that. He's very much like the psychologist of the Goetia. So I really like him for that, and was one of the big ones that helped me kind of move past my misconceptions working with demons. I have to say still, even myself, honestly, as I'm exploring working with Satan, I'm pulling back the layers of, because I still feel that I have some biases there before I could fully immerse myself in working with him. But I'm opening up to it, which is very nice. And I think Dantelion was definitely one of those big triggers for me to kind of change my perspective. And what about you, Viv?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things about demons is that they're not a monolith. So they're all so very different. So there's so much to explore when it comes to working with them because they're all just so unique in their own ways. And that's kind of one of the things about the misconceptions around them is that if you start a sentence off with all demons are, then I don't know because they're all so different. For me personally, with Belial, I did get the whole like yes, offerings kind of vibe, but I also felt this like getting to know you and also strengthening that bond is also important to him. I've had a couple experiences with Leviathan recently where I feel like he doesn't care so much about offerings, but is very like he wants me to learn the lessons that he's giving to me, and he wants to build that relationship, but he's very intent on me like learning from him, almost like a fatherly figure to me personally, and everyone's gonna have a different experience. Also, cool thing about Leviathan is that he has both male and female aspects as well. To me, he appears quite male, but he may appear as female or both, So, yes, just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's what I get from Leviathan. From Lilith is interesting because at the beginning of my relationship with her, she wanted stuff, like she wanted me to get stuff for her altar. She wanted me to get a pendant with her sigil on it. But after that whole phase, once I really started building even more of a connection with her, rather than wanting like those things for her altar and stuff, she just wants me to like learn about her, to read about her, and also to just interact with her. So with her, it's a little bit of both. I feel like with the whole transactional, but also building that close relationship and that close bond. So that's been my experience with her so far. And for me personally, for my UPG, I find that she likes when I am confident. She likes when I step out of my comfort zone, and when I just embrace my power and step into my power. That's almost like a devotional act to her.
Yeah, that's amazing. It was making me think about my relationship with my goddess Freya. Like, I think that's how it really starts off with most spirit connections, where you're very focused maybe in the beginning with offerings, because you're building that initial relationship. It really starts off like an acquaintanceship, especially if you're just working with them and it's not necessarily devotion and you work with them every now and then. It's usually a lot of offerings. But if it's as you build that relationship, as it becomes more daily, they honestly just want you to talk to them. They sometimes like I just have days where they're just like, hey, tell me how your day is going, like, and they just want you to just like sit or lay at the altar and just shout out all your problems and woes or your achievements and your gratitudes, and they just really love that. Obviously, if you work with a lot of spirits, that's really hard because you can't just like go to each one and say the exact same thing like 25 times. I'm like, oh yeah, my day was like this and like that, and say it with the same energy. So it's important to kind of like divide your time between all the entities you work with, depending on how many spirits you work with. If you work with less spirits, that's great. You can build really strong, very personable bonds. Otherwise, if you're like me, you're gonna have to start dividing them by tier of like primary spirits, secondary spirits, tertiary spirits of like how far the workings go, because it gets crazy. And I also wanted to go into talking about the idea of subservience to demons, because there's this whole thing going on. I guess this meme culture of, particularly from coming through from some ceremonial magicians that really just don't like demonolatry. And they created basically this meme of like,
Like, oh, you're Leviathan's bitch or whatever. So this meme, I've seen like one that was funny that I actually laughed at. But a lot of the time it's done in bad taste and it's quite spiteful. And here's the thing, y'all. There's this thing called differences of opinion. There's this thing called difference in like theology, and that's okay. Like it's okay to have differences in opinion. It's okay to have different religions, and it's okay to have different ways of working with demons. And I think we should leave it at that. I think this whole like making fun of demonolators and vice versa is very childish. And I'm not a fan of the whole bootlicking stereotype because that's not really what demonolatry is about. Think deity work. It's like that, but with demons, pretty much. Obviously there's other steps to it. Obviously there's a slightly different dynamic and vibe to demons, of course. And every demon is different, but it is not demon bootlicking. Also, you not putting yourself above demons isn't bootlicking. It's just a different way of working with the class of spirits, and that's completely fine. And here's the thing. I am gonna try not to be too like mean about this, but number one is like you cannot complain about the occult community being toxic and then making it toxic via like making fun of different religions than yours and like different ways of working with demons. Like that's very hypocritical. Number two is that like I think that we should just let each other be. Here, like I'm not gonna go around harassing Solomonic practitioners, so don't go around harassing me, right? I think that's the way it should be. Just like I wouldn't go around harassing Christians, so please don't go around harassing me. Because it's pointless. You making fun of demonolatry is not going to make demonolatry cease to exist. It's not going to make demonolators want to work with demons in the same way you do. And it's just as valid of a path. And yeah, it's not demon bootlicking, guys, any more than deity work is God bootlicking, you know? Or any more than deity work is PETA for gods or anything like that. And, if you work with them not from a demonology perspective, that's fine. Just please respect demonolators as well.
yeah, and like also feeding into that is like devotion. Devotion also comes in many forms. It's not always a sense of like worship as in like, doing your all hails on the floor on your knees, constantly bowing. That's not what goes down. If you do, great. That's your path. It's perfect. But to say that really devotion is really more about an act of not only of service but embodiment. It's about honoring the gnosis of that spirit, embodying it in your everyday life. and carrying their wisdom with you in everything that you do. I feel like the biggest service, not only to ourselves, but to those that we ally ourselves with, is taking that to the next step. After we have truly been more self-actualized, we take it out and we commit to doing greater services for the community, or services in terms of, even if it's just like little simple kind gestures to strangers, anything that embodies the archetype and the energy of that current that we constantly work with whatever beings that we work with. I think that's very valid, and I think that's the perspective that needs to be taken here. Another thing I wanted to go over here is, or feeding further into this topic, is the idea of power and control within Solomonic practitioners. The issue that comes up, and this is not with everyone, of course, but it is essentially a power and control dynamic that occurs. And I think that happens with all magic. There's always this need to have control of our lives when it comes to magic. Sometimes it goes to extremes, especially when we feel out of control with our lives. And it can lead to the point of subjugation of spirits. And when it comes to Solomonic work, it's kind of, I'm not well versed in it, so I can't speak for those within that path and what they do. But understanding that there has to be some level and degree of respect is very important, I feel. I know that you have to exert your will to maintain those protections, as well as the evocations and summonings, exerting your will and working with the angelic forces to constrain their powers, to have them more materialized or what have you. It's also respecting them as an individual. I think it's important to see others as an equal rather than something lesser than you, because when you get into the habit of this power and control dynamic with spirits, anyone who's doing the opposite of what you're doing, you're going to automatically see them as this sense of subservience or this bootlicking. And it's not accurate. You have to understand the matters of devotion. There is a tendency within the left-hand path to want to go to extremes, because a lot of people are very traumatized from monotheistic religions, and they just want to like jump the gun, do everything the exact opposite. So they go to extremes. And those extremes will affect you one way or another, whether if not yourself, it's going to affect you and your relationships with others. So again, it's important to do your inner work, your shadow work. You can't avoid shadow work if you're on the left-hand path or you're working with demons specifically, because their energies will manifest in your subconscious mind, and will try and help you work through those things. But if you're resistant, it's going to come up as something that is too much for you to handle. So I find that to be a very important part to add on to this.
Oh, yes, I completely agree with that. Like, I understand. While I'm not a Solomonic practitioner, I understand the nature of it, but still, I agree that there should be some level of respect involved, because ultimately, the spirit you're evoking is doing something for you. You are evoking it for a reason, and therefore, I think it's important to maintain that and to not view people who work with them in the opposite way as like subjugated, like you said, in the same way you view demons. And here's the thing, like I said earlier, is that it's okay to have theological differences. I know a lot of them believe that they don't have free will or whatever, but still, even if you do believe that, I personally don't as a demonolator, but if you do believe that, just understand that a certain degree of respect is it still should be a given with any spirit that you work with, at least in my opinion, because just like if you're working with someone, for a person to help you or even an animal to help you with something, you're still going to thank them and you're still going to have respect for them, no matter who or what that is. And then the other thing is like the avoidance of shadow work, and I think that ties into dark fluff that we talked about. I think dark fluff is another form of spiritual bypassing, just like how regular fluff is a form of spiritual bypassing. I think it's very easy to get into like the fun, what you view as the fun parts, like the horror aesthetic and like, feeling powerful, right? Because if you're filming yourself hexing everyone who ever criticizes you It gives you like a little ego boost. It gives you like this, it's just a form of spiritual bypassing, in the same way that saying love and light, be happy all the time is, but in like a different font, I guess. And I understand it. I understand. I don't want to judge people too harshly because I know a lot of these people are hurting, but it's important to understand that that's not going to help you heal, and it's not going to really do anything of substance for you. It's just going to make you stay in your comfort zone and continue to go on that path of just like superficiality. So one thing multiple of the spirits I've worked with has taught me is stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's super important in spirituality, especially if your practice is about like self-actualization and kind of that more growing as a person aspect. And if you're just staying in your comfort zone and doing all this dark fluff stuff and pretending to hex everyone, you're just staying in that comfort zone and that spiritual bypassing zone of being, rather than trying to break yourself free of that and actually do something of substance. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, is that spiritual bypassing is not just a problem in the love and light community. It's also a problem in like the dark, I'm going to call them the dark fluff community, because it's just as bad.
Yeah. And it honestly feeds onto the next part of the topic where discussing, like, for example, like pacts with spirits. We get into the mentality that they're gonna do all the work for us, and everything is gonna be resolved with magic, but everything within magic requires some sort of physical action, even if that's just to create and open up the pathways for opportunity to come through. Because if you give, I talked about this before, like if let's say you're doing a love spell and you're trying to call in new love. If you stay inside your house all day, every day, with all your doors and windows locked, the only love you're going to find is maybe with a pizza delivery guy. But otherwise, you need to put yourself out there. You need to go to places consistently and constantly, and that will open up the opportunities. And that's part of the importance with path workings with demons and pacts. With pacts, we're talking about essentially creating an agreement or a contract between you and the spirit, and they will ask for something in return. It will either be related to the thing that you're asking about, or it would just be something that's used to build the bond with that spirit, depending on the kind of relationship that they want to have with you. But really, it's just you having a specific lens of working with that spirit. And sometimes you may want to have a set goal in mind, like, within the next 2 years, within the next month, what have you, the next lunar cycle. It really depends what you're doing within reasonable time, and if you've opened yourself up to as many possibilities and opportunities around you as possible. Of course, my recommendation is, if you're going to do something like that, try and do some road opening work first, get those opportunities flowing, followed by physical action, and then considering doing pacts if that's something that you feel called to. One good book I found is S. Connolly's book on pacts with demons, that she goes into this in depth and the different qualities of pacts, and she has like different templates you can use if that's something that calls to you. But it's important to not feel like spirits are going to do everything for you. You may see a few miracles here and there in your life, but they're probably going to be the one force that's going to ask you to move your own butt and get things in gear. Especially like me, if you work with Lucifer, or like I work with Athena, she's very big on taking assertive action and planning and organizing yourself. If you don't do these things, not a lot is going to be able to flow for you, no matter how many spirits you have backing you up, no matter how good that relationship is. You have to put in the work.
This is so incredibly true. A lot of the time, the spirits you work with, they're going to want to push you to be a better person, and that means not doing all the work for you, right? Like, that's really, really important. It's the same way Now obviously the spirits you work with are not the same as like parental figures at all in a lot of cases, but I'm just kind of making a comparison where think about it. If you were growing up and your parents did absolutely everything for you, you turned 18, they bought you your first house or apartment, they bought you your car, they gave you all the money so you didn't have to get a job. They did everything for you. They never taught you to how to do your laundry. They never taught you how to clean your own house. You move into this house and you don't know how to do anything. You don't know how to pay your bills. You don't know how to do the laundry. You don't know how to set up the dishwasher. You don't know how to be an adult. And it's the same way, like spirits are not going to do everything for you because then you're not going to be self-sufficient, right? Like, what's that saying? You give a man a fish and he eats for a day. You teach him to fish, he can eat for his whole life, something like that. And I think spirits are that same way, So, like, if your parents did everything for you and you never had to do anything, when you move out and you're in that house, that nice little house they got for you, you're not going to know how to take care of it. You're not going to know how to pay bills. You're not going to know how to have a job or hold down a job. You know what I'm saying? So, like, if you apply that sort of thing to spirit work, if the spirits did every single little thing for you, you're not going to improve. And that the whole point of spirituality is kind of lost there because how are you going to self-actualize if everything is done for you? And then ultimately, there's really no point in spirit work if you're not putting in any work. And then the other thing Christian mentioned about like putting in the mundane work is really so important for spell work. And I find, especially for beginners, this is important to know because, it's not a end all solution to your problems because why should it be? Why should they solve all your problems for you? Okay, great. You did a job spell. Did you turn in the job application? Like, did you do anything to get a job, or did you just do the job spell expecting it to fall into your lap? That's just not really how it works. And that's not a bad thing at all. It's a good thing. You got to stay grounded in the mundane world and do the mundane stuff and improve yourself as a person. Because again, if you're expecting spirits to do all the work for you, you're not doing the work. And it's just you lose the entire point of everything with that mentality.
Yeah, and it goes into also our topic on materialism and demonolatry. Like, we have to be aware that while you can work with demons for material gain and things like that, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. A large part of my path workings and workings with Belial are financial, and many other spirits and things like that. There's nothing wrong with materialism. The problem is that when that is your sole focus when working with the demonic divine or any kind of spirits in general, we forget what the real purpose is of our work with them. We have to be aware that these spirits desire more an idea of our own self-actualization. You cannot find self-actualization through your material manifestations. What may be more apparent to you as you make mistakes with your manifestations is your own desires. You may come to better understand what your own wants and needs are. So by constantly looking towards materialism and screwing up somewhere along the line, you have a better idea of what you truly desired all along, which can lead you onto the path of what they really want you to focus on, which is really about your own spiritual development. They care more about your moral, your ethical, as well as your cultivation of your will and confidence, because you are not just, they don't just care about you and your potential. They care about you embodying that potential and carrying out their wisdom out into the world on a much larger and greater scale. We have to consider that spirits see the past, present, and future simultaneously. They're not affected by time like we are, so they're looking at the grander scale of cause and effect when they work with us. And they are never going to work with us outside of our true and higher will. Sometimes we may want things and desire things for ourselves that we are not able to obtain because that's not what we need in life. So it's important to also meditate and contemplate on your true will, because that's where they're really going to align with. And if you align your actions with your true will, you're going to get a lot more benefit from your workings with spirits in general.
And also going off of that, and this goes beyond just demonolatry, especially folk magic. Historically, a lot of these folk magic spells have been done through dire need rather than just wanting like $1 million, which is why if you do a spell to get $1 million, it just might not happen because it's not something you actually need. And and I think that's something we need to look at critically when thinking of baneful magic, because a lot of people look at it very surface level and they go, oh, well, baneful magic's bad, right? This seems morally wrong to me. Understandable, but if you're looking at the historical context, especially when it's folk magic done by people who have been oppressed historically, for example, domination magic, where they needed to be able to have some semblance of control over their lives. And so they'd have to do domination magic on this person who had full control over them so they could gain at least some semblance of control, right? Or hexing abusers, people in abusive situations, or even just hexing someone. I don't think there's really anything wrong with like a return to sender spell, where if someone has done you wrong, why not? But, beyond that, really just understanding that historically magic has a lot of the time been practiced by people who really, really needed it. And I'm not saying you have to be desperate to do like a money spell, but I am saying, look into what you actually need. Do you really need $1 million, or are you just doing it just for kicks? You know what I'm saying? And I truly, in my opinion and my experience, if it's something that will not benefit you or if it's something that's going to hinder you, it might get blocked. So the deities I work with might just be like, nope, because it's going to be harmful to you and to your growth. Or maybe they'll let it happen just so you can learn from that experience. So, yeah, that's kind of my little 2 cents based on that whole thing.
Yeah, and to sum up everything today, be aware and really contemplate on where you stand in your own power and your own energy. Be aware what your true will is. Really meditate on that. And know that whatever you're being led to is for your greatest good. Even if it seems like the uncommon path, even if it seems like you're paving your own road, honor that, because you're not going to become anything but yourself. And I think that's a common fear that comes up when we look into, seeing all these edgelords and all these misconceptions. We think that we're giving our power away. But really, it's not about giving our power away. It's really about forging spiritual alliances and going through with the highest and best, not only for ourselves, but for others. And I think that's really important to look at it as not only as self-actualization, but a service to the greater good of everything that you really want to see in the world. And one message that really came through the other day was embody the beauty that you wish to see in the world. And I think that falls into with even demonolatry. So thank you guys so much for listening in. This is Christian, aka the Atlantean Alchemist, and
Viv, aka Lunar Faery Witch. I think that was a beautiful way to wrap this up. Be sure to think about, the world around you and how you fit into the scheme of things, because that's also super important. And yeah, we will see you guys next time.